For most of modern history, we've been taught to fear hunger. Skipping meals is often framed as dangerous, irresponsible, or even harmful to the body. The dominant message is simple: food equals energy, and without constant intake, the system breaks down. But human biology tells a more nuanced story, one that begins far beneath the surface, inside the cell itself. Within every cell of your body, there is a quiet decision being made every moment. A decision about whether that cell will continue operating as it is, repair internal damage, or dismantle parts of itself to survive. This process is called autophagy, and despite how extreme the name may sound, it is not a malfunction. It is a fundamental survival program encoded into human physiology. Autophagy literally means self-eating, but a more accurate description would be self-renewal. It is the body's way of identifying worn-out components, damaged proteins, dysfunctional mitochondria, unstable cellular structures, and breaking them down so their raw materials can be reused. Instead of accumulating waste, the cell cleans house. Instead of building endlessly, it pauses, evaluates, and repairs. For decades, scientists underestimated how central this process was to health. Cells appeared to function normally under constant feeding conditions, so autophagy remained largely invisible. But as research advanced, a striking pattern emerged. When autophagy slowed or failed, disease risk increased dramatically. Neurodegenerative disorders, metabolic dysfunction, immune decline, and accelerated aging all shared one common feature: impaired cellular cleanup. This shifted how scientists began thinking about aging itself. Aging was no longer seen as just wear and tear over time. It became understood as a gradual failure of maintenance. When cells lose their ability to recycle and repair, damage compounds, inflammation rises, efficiency drops. Systems that once worked quietly begin to fail. What makes autophagy especially fascinating is how it is activated. Unlike many biological processes that require drugs or external intervention, autophagy responds directly to environmental signals, especially nutrient availability. When food is abundant, the body prioritizes growth, storage, and reproduction. But when food disappears, a different program activates. One focused not on expansion, but on preservation. This is where fasting enters the picture. From an evolutionary perspective, constant eating is the anomaly. For most of human history, food availability was unpredictable. Periods of abundance were followed by periods of scarcity. The body evolved not just to tolerate this pattern, but to use it as a signal. Scarcity did not mean immediate weakness, it meant adaptation. When nutrient intake drops, the body doesn't panic right away. Instead, it begins reallocating resources. Insulin levels fall. Energy use becomes more efficient. Fat stores are accessed. And slowly, cellular repair pathways that are suppressed during constant feeding begin to awaken. But this process is not instantaneous. Autophagy does not activate the moment you skip a meal. In the early hours after eating, the body is still operating on readily available fuel. Glucose circulates in the bloodstream. Glycogen stored in the liver provides backup energy. From the outside, very little seems to change. As time passes, however, subtle shifts begin. Hormonal signals adjust. The body senses that incoming nutrients are no longer guaranteed. Around this point, metabolic flexibility becomes essential. Instead of relying primarily on sugar, the body gradually increases fat utilization. This transition is quiet, internal, and largely unnoticed, but it sets the stage for something much deeper. Behind the scenes, molecular sensors inside cells are constantly monitoring energy status. When nutrients are plentiful, growth pathways dominate. When nutrients decline, these sensors send a different message: conserve, recycle, repair. Growth pauses, maintenance takes priority. This is the biological logic behind autophagy. It is not a detox trend, it is not a weight loss trick. It is a core survival mechanism designed to protect the organism during periods of uncertainty. Understanding this changes how we interpret fasting. The question is no longer whether the body can function without constant food. The question becomes, what systems activate when food is absent long enough? Modern research suggests that autophagy begins to meaningfully increase only after a certain metabolic threshold is crossed. This threshold varies between individuals, depending on diet, activity level, insulin sensitivity, and overall metabolic health. But the general pattern remains consistent. In the first phase, the body is still burning stored fuel. In the second phase, it begins shifting priorities. And in the third phase, true cellular recycling accelerates. This timeline matters because it reframes hunger itself. Hunger is not simply a signal of danger. In controlled, temporary contexts, it is a signal that the body is transitioning from external dependence to internal optimization. However, none of this suggests that longer is always better. Autophagy exists on a spectrum. At moderate levels, it supports repair and resilience. Pushed too far, the same stress can become harmful. The distinction between therapeutic fasting and starvation is not philosophical, it is biological. That is why understanding timing, context, and limits is essential. In this video, we are not advocating extreme deprivation. We are examining the science of how the body responds to short-term fasting, hour by hour, and why many of the benefits associated with fasting are not about weight loss at all, but about cellular intelligence. As we move forward, we'll explore exactly when autophagy begins to rise, what changes occur at different fasting durations, and how the body balances repair with protection. Because once you understand this internal timeline, fasting stops being a mystery and becomes a biological conversation your body has been waiting to have. As the fasting window extends beyond the early metabolic shift, the body enters a phase that is far more strategic than most people realize. This is the period where the internal conversation changes tone. The question is no longer how to use incoming energy, but how to preserve, optimize, and repair what already exists. Around the 12-hour mark, several key changes converge. Insulin levels remain suppressed, signaling that energy storage is no longer the priority. Liver glycogen, your body's short-term carbohydrate reserve, begins to approach depletion. With glucose availability declining, the body increasingly relies on fatty acids and ketone production to maintain energy balance. This transition is not a crisis, it is a controlled handoff between fuel systems. What matters here is not just where energy comes from, but what this shift allows to happen at the cellular level. Low insulin and reduced nutrient signaling remove the brakes on pathways that are normally suppressed during frequent eating. Among these pathways, one of the most important is autophagy. At this stage, autophagy does not suddenly turn on like a switch. Instead, it ramps up gradually. Cells begin increasing their sensitivity to internal damage signals. Proteins that are misfolded or no longer functional are flagged for removal. Damaged mitochondria, tiny power plants inside cells, are identified as inefficient and potentially harmful. This is the beginning of cellular triage. Behind this process are molecular regulators that act like internal sensors. One of the most studied is AMPK, often described as the cell's energy gauge. When energy availability drops, AMPK activity rises. Its message is clear: stop building, start conserving, and initiate repair. At the same time, another pathway known as mTOR, strongly associated with growth and protein synthesis, becomes suppressed. This suppression is critical. Growth is expensive. Repair is efficient. When mTOR quiets down, the cellular environment becomes favorable for recycling rather than accumulation. Together, rising AMPK activity and reduced mTOR signaling create the biochemical conditions where autophagy can meaningfully increase. Importantly, this process is not limited to muscle or fat tissue. It occurs system-wide. Brain cells, immune cells, liver cells all respond to the same internal cues. This is why fasting often produces effects that extend beyond metabolism alone. One of the most noticeable changes many people report during this phase is a shift in mental state. Despite the absence of food, cognitive function often feels more stable or even enhanced. This is not accidental. As fasting continues, levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, begin to rise. BDNF supports neuronal resilience, learning, and synaptic plasticity. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. In a food-scarce environment, clarity and focus increase the chances of survival. In parallel, ketones produced from fat begin to play a larger role in fueling the brain. Ketones provide a steady, efficient energy source and generate fewer oxidative byproducts than glucose. This cleaner fuel profile may partially explain the reported sense of mental clarity during fasting. Meanwhile, inflammatory signaling often begins to decrease. Chronic overnutrition is associated with low-grade inflammation. Temporarily removing constant nutrient input gives inflammatory pathways an opportunity to downregulate. Cells are no longer bombarded with growth signals and oxidative stress. This combination reduced inflammation, stabilized energy delivery, and increased cellular cleanup marks a pivotal transition. The body is no longer simply adapting to the absence of food. It is actively using the absence of food as a signal to repair. However, it is essential to understand that this phase still operates within limits. The body remains protective. Muscle tissue is largely preserved due to elevated growth hormone levels, which tend to rise during fasting. Growth hormone helps maintain lean mass while promoting fat utilization. This hormonal environment supports survival without immediate tissue breakdown. By the time fasting approaches the 16-hour mark, autophagy activity becomes more measurable in experimental settings. Cellular recycling processes accelerate. Autophagosomes, specialized structures responsible for engulfing damaged components, become more active. This does not mean that all cells suddenly rejuvenate. Repair is selective. Priority is given to the most damaged or inefficient components. Think of it as targeted maintenance rather than full renovation. For individuals with good metabolic flexibility, this phase often feels surprisingly stable. Hunger signals may fluctuate, but they are frequently less intense than expected. This is partly due to hormonal adaptation and partly due to the brain's shift toward ketone utilization. For others, especially those accustomed to frequent carbohydrate intake, this phase may feel uncomfortable. Headaches, fatigue, or irritability can occur as the body adjusts. These sensations are not indicators of harm, but signs of metabolic transition. That said, discomfort should not be ignored or pushed through aggressively. From a scientific standpoint, this window represents the body testing balance. It is determining whether repair can proceed without triggering stress responses associated with starvation. As long as hydration is maintained and the fast remains time-limited, the system remains in adaptive mode. This distinction is crucial. Autophagy is beneficial because it occurs within a controlled physiological context. Once that context is lost, when stress hormones dominate and nutrient deprivation becomes excessive, the same processes can shift from protective to destructive. That is why most research points to moderate fasting durations as the most effective for cellular health. This mid-range window allows autophagy to rise without compromising systemic stability. As we move into the next phase, the effects become deeper and more pronounced. Cellular recycling expands beyond routine maintenance into more extensive repair. Mitochondrial quality control improves. Immune cell turnover increases. The body transitions from preparation into active regeneration. Understanding this progression reframes fasting entirely. It is not about enduring hunger. It is about allowing the body enough uninterrupted time to do work it cannot perform under constant feeding. In the next section, we'll explore what happens as fasting reaches the 24-hour mark, when autophagy enters what many researchers describe as the repair zone, and why this stage attracts so much attention in longevity science. As fasting approaches the 36-hour mark, the body enters what many researchers consider the peak efficiency window for autophagy. This is the point where cellular recycling is not only active, but highly coordinated, energy efficient, and deeply integrated across systems. By now, the metabolic landscape is unmistakable. Glycogen stores have long been exhausted. Insulin remains suppressed. Ketones dominate as a primary fuel source. Growth signaling pathways stay quiet, while repair-oriented pathways remain fully engaged. The body is no longer transitioning, it is operating within a clearly defined biological mode. At this stage, autophagy reaches its most intensive expression. Cellular components that have been marked earlier are now actively dismantled and recycled. Proteins are broken down into amino acids and reused. Lipids are repurposed. Damaged cellular machinery is removed with precision rather than urgency. Importantly, this is not a state of chaos. It is a state of prioritization. Cells are not breaking down indiscriminately. They are making calculated decisions about what to keep, what to recycle, and what to replace. This selectivity is what separates adaptive fasting from starvation. In starvation, tissue breakdown is driven by desperation. In controlled fasting, recycling is driven by efficiency. Hormonal dynamics during this window reinforce this distinction. Growth hormone levels are typically elevated, sometimes significantly. This supports the preservation of lean tissue and helps prevent unnecessary muscle loss. At the same time, fat metabolism remains high, supplying energy without destabilizing blood glucose. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, may increase modestly but within a regulated range. As long as the fast remains time-limited and hydration is adequate, cortisol acts as a mobilizer, not a destroyer. It helps maintain alertness and fuel availability without triggering widespread tissue breakdown. This balance explains why many people report a paradoxical sense of calm during this phase. Energy feels steady rather than urgent. Hunger signals often quiet down. The nervous system appears less reactive. From a physiological perspective, this reflects a stable internal environment rather than depletion. However, this window also represents the upper edge of adaptation for most individuals. Beyond this point, the margin for error narrows. Small imbalances such as inadequate electrolytes or insufficient hydration can quickly shift the body from productive stress into strain. This is why 36 hours is often described as a powerful but advanced fasting duration. The biological benefits are real, but they are not universally accessible without preparation. From a cellular standpoint, this phase supports what researchers describe as a full autophagic reset. Mitochondrial quality control is robust. Immune cell turnover is active. Inflammatory signaling is suppressed. Cellular efficiency is optimized. These processes help explain why fasting is being studied for its potential role in longevity. Aging is associated with the gradual accumulation of damaged cellular components. Autophagy is one of the few mechanisms capable of reversing that accumulation rather than compensating for it. But it is essential to emphasize that autophagy is not a linear process. More time does not automatically equal more benefit. Beyond a certain duration, the body's priorities shift again. When fasting extends too far, repair gives way to conservation. Muscle protein breakdown may increase. Hormonal balance can deteriorate. Stress signaling overtakes repair signaling. At this point, the same mechanisms that once protected the organism begin to threaten stability. This transition is subtle but critical. Biologically, starvation and fasting share surface similarities, but they diverge sharply beneath the surface. Fasting is voluntary, time-limited, and occurs in the presence of adequate hydration and micronutrient reserves. Starvation is prolonged, involuntary, and depletes essential systems. In fasting, the body chooses efficiency. In starvation, the body chooses survival at any cost. This distinction matters because it reframes how we interpret extreme practices. Pushing beyond adaptive limits does not unlock deeper healing, it undermines it. That is why most evidence supports a middle ground. Short daily fasts promote regular cellular maintenance. Occasional longer fasts, when done responsibly, allow deeper repair cycles, but consistency and recovery matter more than intensity. After a fast, refeeding plays a critical role. Nutrients reintroduced at the right time provide the raw materials needed to rebuild what autophagy has cleared. Protein synthesis resumes. Immune cells regenerate. Mitochondria multiply. Without proper refeeding, the benefits of fasting are incomplete. This cyclical pattern, fast, repair, refeed, is central to metabolic resilience. The body thrives on rhythm, not extremes. Understanding this rhythm shifts the conversation around fasting. It moves the focus away from endurance and toward timing, away from deprivation and toward coordination. As we reach the final section, we'll step back and synthesize what this entire timeline reveals. Not just about fasting, but about how the body is designed to heal when given the right signals, the right limits, and the right recovery. When we step back and look at the entire fasting timeline from the first missed meal to the peak of autophagy, a clear pattern emerges. The body does not unravel without constant food. It reorganizes, it prioritizes. And under the right conditions, it repairs. This reframes fasting from a test of willpower into a biological dialogue. Each phase carries a distinct purpose. The early hours are about fuel transition, the middle window is about metabolic recalibration, and the later stages, when time-limited and supported, unlock cellular maintenance programs that rarely operate under continuous feeding. What stands out most is not how extreme these processes are, but how intelligent they are. Autophagy is not a blunt instrument. It is a selective, regulated system that evolved to protect the organism during uncertainty. It identifies inefficiency, recycles damage, and restores balance without dismantling what is still functional. This challenges a common assumption in modern health culture, that more input always leads to better outcomes. In reality, constant intake keeps the system busy but leaves little room for maintenance. Growth dominates, repair waits. Fasting, when approached thoughtfully, creates a temporary pause in that cycle. It gives the body uninterrupted time to do work that cannot happen while nutrients are continuously flowing in. That is why many of the benefits associated with fasting, improved metabolic efficiency, reduced inflammation, cellular renewal, are not about deprivation, but about timing. However, the science is equally clear on one critical point. Fasting is not universally beneficial, and it is not risk-free. Biology operates within boundaries. Autophagy thrives in a controlled environment, not in extremes. Once stress signals outweigh repair signals, the same mechanisms that once supported health can undermine it. This is why duration matters. Short, consistent fasting windows support regular maintenance. Occasional longer fasts, when done responsibly, may allow deeper repair. But pushing beyond adaptive limits does not unlock additional healing. It shifts the body into conservation and survival mode. Equally important is what happens after the fast. Refeeding is not an afterthought. It is the completion of the cycle. The nutrients reintroduced provide the raw materials needed to rebuild what autophagy has cleared. Protein supports tissue repair. Micronutrients restore enzymatic function. Energy availability signals the body that it is safe to transition back into growth. Without proper refeeding, the benefits of fasting remain incomplete. Repair requires both removal and replacement. The rhythm fast, repair, refeed is what builds resilience over time. Another key insight from this timeline is that fasting is only one of several ways to activate cellular repair pathways. Exercise, sleep, temperature exposure, and nutrient composition all influence similar mechanisms. Fasting is powerful because it is direct, but it is not the only tool. This broader context matters because it prevents fasting from being misunderstood as a requirement. It is an option, a signal, a strategy, not a mandate. Ultimately, the value of understanding autophagy lies in perspective. It reveals that the body is not fragile by default. It is adaptive. It contains systems designed to protect long-term function, but those systems depend on environmental cues. Modern life provides constant signals to grow, store, and consume. Rarely does it provide signals to pause and repair. Fasting temporarily restores that balance, not by forcing the body into crisis, but by allowing it to return to a mode it recognizes. The takeaway is not that everyone should fast. The takeaway is that health is not built solely through addition. Sometimes it is supported through strategic absence. Understanding when the body repairs itself and why allows for better decisions, better timing, and greater respect for biological limits. And that is where real longevity science begins. Not with extremes, but with informed restraint. If this exploration helped clarify how fasting influences cellular repair, metabolism, and long-term health, consider sharing it with someone curious about how the body truly works. And if you want more evidence-based deep dives into the hidden systems shaping human health, subscribe to the channel. Because the more we understand the body's internal logic, the better we can work with it rather than against it.